Welcome to Ethos Effect.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast. After building and learning from failures,
We discovered our ethos and leveraged it
to scale, sell, and build again our seven-figure businesses.
whether you're starting out or leveling up.
This podcast is your source for innovation and lasting impact. Welcome to this week's episode of the Ethos Effect podcast. Woo, I'm pretty excited about this one. I'm not going to lie. And the reason is this one hits really close to home. So today you're going to hear from Robyn O'Brien. She's the founder of Sirona Ventures. Honestly, it'll take me 5 minutes just to list off her accomplishments because the things she's done has been so impressive, including a TED Talk with 1.2 million views. She has been on the Forbes 50 impact list. She's owned multiple companies. The impact that she has had on the food, agriculture, and climate industry and tech is incredible. When you think about change, she is the person that I would think about, how our food system has changed, how the regulations for things have changed. What did you think?
Taking on a huge industry, the food industry, how things are made, GMOs, food standards in the States versus other countries. And I mean, what a behemoth to try to
I thought what we did was hard, right? Like fighting insurance companies, doing the right thing, like transforming healthcare in America. And I mean, like you said, the food industry is bigger, badder, more mafia.
It's also cause and effect a little bit, right? The food may be the cause for the rising healthcare that we're dealing with. So we're doing our best to fight the costs, and she's kind of taken the front end of that conversation with the food. I mean, I feel like half the people in my life are gluten-free nowadays. So it's like, what is going on in the world?
So whenever we go to a restaurant, Donovan says, I'll be like, I'll take the gluten-free pizza. And he'll be like, I'll take the gluten-full pizza, please. And I'm like, come on, dude.
Well,
no,
all right, don't get me wrong. I get it. I'm sorry that everybody that has to deal with gluten-free, but the side effect of it is they all try to convince you that the cauliflower crust is fantastic.
It's phenomenal.
And it might work, and I'm glad you get
we need
a
enjoyment
resemblance
somewhere
of pizza, but just don't try to convince me it's good.
So personal story really quick before we dive into the episode. I don't know if our viewers know if I've shared this at all, but I have an autoimmune disorder called Hashimoto's. And we've been trying to figure out like what the heck could have caused this, right? So it's been like 15 years of me spending money going through the traditional healthcare system trying to figure out what the heck is going on, causing all these symptoms. Long story short, find out it's Hashimoto's about a year and a half ago. Well, recently, so I've been taking medications, went gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free. I call it fun-free. There is no more fun in my life when it comes to food. Donovan's been on this journey with me. My numbers have barely changed. And so we spent a ton of money because guess what? It's not covered under health insurance, super fun. Went and did a test on mold, toxin test. So it looked at mold in your blood, plastics in your blood, biophosphates, all sorts of things. And guess what? We got the results a week ago, and yours truly is incredibly toxic when it comes to BPA and plastics. But guess what? We drink out of glass water bottles with the highest quality filtered water you could possibly imagine. I have no idea where this BPA is coming from. Biophosphates, it's like somebody sprayed pesticides in my blood because there's that much pesticides in my blood. We don't do yard work. And then the mold was also next level. And that's actually, I just found out, is what's contributing to my autoimmune disorder. So the timing of this conversation is wild because guess what? I'm learning all of that comes from food. Every part of it. When I went through with my doctor, how the heck is all this getting in my body? It's food. Say something. Make me feel better.
I don't know if I can make you feel better, but Robyn certainly had an enlightening talk.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about how this stuff started, came to be, and what we can actually do to make it better. She had some interesting ideas, including, looking where you're putting your money. A dollar is a vote. And she also said we belong to each other. So I thought that was really interesting because she's like, we all have to kind of take this on. If
we fail or we rise
If
together.
our food is messing you up, it's messing me up. Like, let's fix it.
The other thing that was inspiring is how the collaborative nature, like this isn't a political issue. As much as people want to make everything a political issue, it's not. It's we belong together. It is our health. What could possibly be more important than our health? Well, with my passionate monologue, thank you everybody for listening. More importantly, let's hear from Robyn. Let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast. Chelsea Donovan Reichus here with our special guest today, Robyn O'Brien. She's the founder of Sirona Ventures. She's been on the Impact 50 list. She's had a best-selling novel. She's got another one coming out, a TED Talk with 1.2 million views. I can't tell you, Robyn, how excited I am to talk to you today. You have done some really impressive stuff. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I love what you guys are about. I'm so glad you reached out.
So to kind of, obviously I've done my research. Donovan has done his research. We know all about Robyn. Can you get our viewers up to speed on who you are, what you do, what problems you solve?
Yeah, it's been this pretty unlikely journey, but I wouldn't trade it for anything at this point. I grew up in Houston, Texas, from a pretty conservative family, went to business school on a full scholarship, went into finance, into the investment world. I was the only woman on the team. So the guys said, cover the food industry. I was really annoyed by that when it happened, but I was the rookie, so I didn't have a choice, cover the food industry. And then we moved to Colorado in 2000 and had our kids really quickly. I had 4 kids in 5 years, and it was my 4th child that had this allergic reaction. So all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? Because when we were kids, like PB&Js and cartons of milk weren't like loaded weapons on a lunchroom table like they are today. So having done all this research and having this kind of analytic mindset, I sort of took that space and I went into that space as an analyst. I was like, what is going on with the health of our children? And this generation of kids has a title, Generation RX. And so I kind of went back into the food industry, started asking a bunch of questions they didn't really want me asking, and really started to advocate for a cleaner food supply. As I did, the media captured it, was in the press a lot. It led to my first book deal. The Unhealthy Truth was published in 2009, really, really early to this clean food movement. There really were not a lot of people talking about it. And a lot of people, when I was bringing this stuff up, kind of looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like it really couldn't be that bad. We hadn't really accepted that the food system was that bad. And then, since then, it's really just been a series of partnerships and companies and work that has really helped sort of go at that issue of how do we actually clean up the food system. The capital that we bring into our food system is aligned with, a really healthy food system and really starting to understand sort of these dynamics. And I'm really grateful because, today, thankfully, there are a lot of really fun people that are working on this. It's not lonely and isolating anymore, but in the beginning, it really was.
So this is something that's kind of close to home for us because this is something Chelsea's recently been experiencing. She's been having like food sensitivities that have kind of come out of nowhere. And it's, all the typical culprits, I'd imagine, wheat, dairy,
gluten,
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about, I heard a little bit about, I guess, the U.S. standards. She's Canadian, so she also kind of gets that. I know they have different standards for their foods, but what's the cause? Where does this start?
Yeah. So I'll preface this by saying, my background is finance, 100% finance. And I've been at this intersection of food and finance. I'm not a science person. I'm not a doctor. So really make sure for anybody listening, consult with your doctor, but also really make sure that your doctor is up to speed on a lot of these changes too. Because one of the things that I saw personally with our pediatrician was the pediatrician had been educated like 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of these changes that have come into the food system have really come in the last 10 to 20 years. So while they were in med school, and doctors in med school really they don't spend a lot of time on food in the first place. So there was sort of this like disconnect in what she had actually studied versus what we know about the food system today. And so just, qualifying it with that, we have introduced so many things into the food system that didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago. Genetically engineered ingredients were introduced in the 1990s. They'll try to say, oh, these things have existed for thousands of years. That's a big pile of bunk because the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office holds those patents. So the first patents were in the late 1980s. A bunch of them came in the 1990s. And it really was just like a moneymaker for the chemical companies because they could sell these seeds, apply more chemicals, and charge revenue and charge licensing fees and trait fees and make all this money off of this stuff. And the problem is that in the US, we were really one of the only developed countries in the world where this was just widely adopted without any kind of labeling. So when genetically engineered ingredients were introduced in other countries, all of our trading partners, UK, India, China, Russia, all those places, they labeled them so that consumers could make an informed choice, basically like, hey, this is new to the food system and it's in your whatever, fill in the blank, mac and cheese, your cereal, whatever. We didn't do that here. And so not only were these genetically engineered ingredients introduced, but when we did that, the application of this weed killer that's used on these products in the field just skyrocketed. And the seeds were genetically engineered to withstand increasing doses of the weed killer. They were called Roundup Ready seeds, and Roundup was the weed killer. So if you're selling Roundup Ready seeds and you're selling Roundup, and all of a sudden it's just like there's more and more of that stuff going out, you're making a ton of money as the chemical company. But the problem is that we the eaters didn't know that this was happening. And that was really my big thing, was I believe in an informed choice. I believe that as an eater, you deserve an informed choice. I believe that as parents, we deserve an informed choice. And that wasn't happening. And that was really the thing that really got me going. And it was sort of a universal offense. And so as I really started to look at our food system, a lot of these multinational food companies make products according to the standards of the different countries. So in the US, they make them with all the artificial ingredients, all the genetically engineered ingredients, and things like high fructose corn syrup. But then in Europe, where they have a higher standard and they don't allow these artificial colors, they don't allow the genetically engineered ingredients without labels, and then they don't allow high fructose corn syrup, there's just a higher quality product. So you're looking at the label and you're thinking like, hey, it's the same granola bar. It's not. And that was so offensive to me and such an insult to the health of our families. And so that really began a lot of the advocacy. And it's pretty systemic at this point. And again, like the analyst, I got it. It's like you take out those real ingredients and you sub in this artificial stuff, and it's driving margin and your profitability is better. That makes a ton of sense. But it's got these externalized costs, and we're starting to see that. And I think what's happened is this generation of kids has the title Generation RX because of all of these conditions, whether it's autism or allergies or ADHD or asthma, just diabetes, obesity, all these things. And then it's also starting to really reach all of us. The rates of cancer in the US are some of the highest in the world. It's 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women. And I remember when I first read that it was 1 in 2 men, I was like, why are we not talking about this all over the place? Like, if it's 1 in 2 men and we're not talking about this, are we waiting for it to be 1 in 1? Like, what are we waiting
for everybody?
How is that even possible? Right. You think.
Right.
Yeah.
So it just like, it was sort of, and, early on when I was calling this out, I mean, people at first were like, it can't be that bad, because you don't want to believe that a system could fail us this badly. But when you really step back and you say, okay, let's look at the lobbying dollars. And this was a lot in my first book, let's look at the influence. Let's look at the revolving door between industry and, some of these agencies. And it is really, really disappointing. And it's really hard to hear. And once you know that, then you know how to actually step into this role to advocate for yourself and for the health of your family. And thankfully, what started to happen was, as I began to speak out on these things, at first I was absolutely hated by industry. And then I gave a TED Talk in 2011 that really started to spread. And I started to hear from the executives inside the companies themselves. And they were super quiet, and they were like, look, you can say things we can't say. We want you to come in here and help us rethink this and reformulate. And as I got inside those companies and was really helping them understand, this is not a fad. Cancer is not a fad. Autism is not a fad. You're going to have to reformulate because fundamentally the health of our families is changing. And as they did that, it became really clear that the supply chain wasn't there. Only 1% of our supply chain in the US is organic, and 80% of consumers are buying something organic. 75% of grocery store categories are organic. And so that math wasn't working. And so that was when I sort of stepped back and thought, how do we actually start to work on this supply chain here and actually grow things that consumers want to eat? And then that's also actually better for the farmers, because then they're not having to take out all these loans to buy these genetically engineered seeds and all the chemicals. So they reduce their inputs, which helps them manage their profitability. So really sort of, really rethinking this supply chain. It's a win-win for absolutely everyone except the chemical company.
So, go ahead.
There are so many similarities with the problem that you're solving and then the battles that we choose in our business. So we are healthcare consultants and we design employer-sponsored healthcare plans. But instead of just perpetuating the problem by giving employees these plans where costs are increasing every year, their deductible is $5,000, a family plan is $24,000 a year, it's about getting to the root cause of the problem, which are these claims. And what I find so fascinating is I think, and we're going up against giant industry,
Yeah,
right?
no,
Like,
I know.
so we, and I feel like very inspired by your story and like can relate a lot to it. But the thing that I find really interesting as I hear you speak is here I am thinking we're solving the root cause of the problem by focusing on the claims, right? Like getting to the root cause, the rising cost of healthcare. But really, a lot of the root cause of the rising cost of healthcare is this shitty food that we're eating and this
Yeah, and I
terrible
think
supply chain of food.
we do. And we spend, I have a presentation and it's great to know you guys for this because we spend 20 cents of every dollar in the US on healthcare and disease management, more than any other country in the world. And as an entrepreneur, I looked at that and I thought, like, is this really how we want to be allocating our resources? Like, do we really want to be spending 20 cents of every dollar on disease management? No human being wants to, no company wants to. And rather than a company having the resources to really drive towards their core competency, like they're stuck managing all these healthcare costs. So it's got these it's these tentacles, that reach into absolutely all of us, whether you're in the food industry or not, whether you care about this or not, it's actually impacting every business like you've touched on, in the country. And I think that's where it's sort of like, how do we have a universal call to action? To me, it is absolutely not a political thing. It's like a fundamental human rights thing. This is food security is national security, in my opinion. I think politicians on both sides of the aisle, no sides of the aisle, wherever you are, like we all eat. And a clean and healthy food supply is fundamentally beneficial to a country, in my opinion. And I think when you have a contaminated food supply, that then puts things like your military at risk because guess what? Due to the obesity, due to the diabetes, due to all these conditions, people can't even qualify for the military. So it really has this reach that is so much further beyond. It's hard because you hear people like, oh, eat cleaner, do this, do that. Nobody wants to be told what to eat. And when you then layer on the fact that the cleaner, better for you options are more expensive, then it feels personal and it feels like an economic judgment. So that's really where I sort of got into this like food and finance intersection, because it's like, how do we economically change this so that the clean and safe food is the affordable option? And then the stuff that's all contaminated, like that should be the stuff, that's the newer ingredients where there should be all this labeling of all this stuff that's going into those products. And that the burden of the cost should be there, not on the farmers that are providing the clean stuff.
So what's going to be the quickest way to actually make progress in this field to kind of clean up? Because I don't know if this is true, but my perception of the food industry would be that, there'd be 3 to 5 companies that, own the majority share of what we see on our grocery shelves. So like, what's the quickest way to actually make impact to get it turned around to?
It's a really good question. So I think you really got to advocate. The companies do listen. And I've worked with all of them at this point, the huge ones and the little ones and the private equity firms funding them and the banks funding them. And they are paying attention to what's happening. So don't underestimate the power of your voice. I mean, you guys clearly with the podcast, more of that, more of the same. I'm an executive producer on a film called Common Ground. We just premiered it in LA last week, and it will hit the streaming platforms hopefully in April.
God, I was going to ask, what's it called
absolutely
again?
Amazing.
Common
it's an
Ground?
Amazing tool, an amazing resource that speaks to this. But I think, the other thing that, it's sort of like you want to say shop and you want to say advocate, and it's like start a book club, start a movie night, work with your kids' school. The other piece I think that's really, really important that we all can make an impact in every day is how are we actually investing? Because whatever capital you have at work and your investments, like that's an extension of you. And those are your values, and I think there's been this disconnect. I mean, I had it. I remember when I pulled up our Vanguard, I was like, oh my God, like I own all these things that I'm speaking against. And it felt very disconnected. And so, there's really, I think, an opportunity in the finance space to say, how do we actually create better for you investment platforms and products that are aligned with the future that we want to have, so that we're beginning to really invest this way, because that to me is the lever. That's where they're going to pay attention. That's where the boards of these companies are going to pay attention, is really when investors are like, you know what? This is a liability to be pushing out these products that we're constantly getting headlines in the press about lawsuits and class action, all that. Like, it's a liability. So how do we actually transition this? And it's starting to happen. My next book, Seeding Innovation, the World Bank, the European Central Bank, Fidelity, 32 asset managers, they're literally all starting to speak to this, because it's a risk to these business models to continue to push products that we know carry this liability. So, that again, like, I mean, it's money talks, and, it's like, there are plenty of talking heads and there are plenty of people that are talking about this, but I think, ultimately it's going that investor route that I think is going to have the biggest impact.
Couldn't agree more. I always say, like, a dollar is a vote, anytime
Right.
you put a dollar
Right.
towards something, you're voting it up or down.
Well, and it's like, we're so mindful as we kind of come into this. It's like, it just feels like an awakening to me, where when we come into it, we're so mindful of what we put in our shopping carts. And it's like, what do our financial products look like? Are we investing in a way that's aligned with what we believe in our everyday, in our shopping carts? And, are we investing that way? And, I do think, bringing more women into leadership and investing is also going to help that, because just that balance helps, that beautiful, like, hybrid helps.
Absolutely. How long do you think it's going to take before like impact capital and like the things that you do aren't just like some little department in these big companies and these big investment firms, and it's sort of like this passion project, but it's actually valued at the same way that, people over profits or people equal to profits?
Right. Well, I'm super excited. It's the first time I've been able to announce this, but I have just joined a company called Montcalm, and it's impact investment. And my partner there, Holly Ruxton, was at Morgan Stanley for a long time, just ran circles around everybody. And she really saw the opportunity to create a platform where you can align. She's all about alignment with values, where you can align your values with your investments and not compromise on return. And I think that's really important. It's like, we're not asking, like, if you do that, like, you're going to lose people. So to really work with her to grow out that platform. And I see the same opportunity where we went into the food industry a decade ago and we were like, we need better for you products. And we blew that out. Going into the finance space saying, hey, guess what? We need better for us products. And we're going to blow that out. And people are starting to really pay attention, because there is now an understanding with fossil fuels and agrochemical and all of these things, especially when we have organizations like the World Bank calling this out. I mean, the World Bank last year put out this big report, and they were like, hey, we've got toxic subsidies, and we are literally subsidizing the destruction of the food system and the destruction of the planet, by subsidizing agrochemicals and fossil fuels and all these things. And what I loved about that was it was the World Bank, it wasn't Greenpeace, it was the World Bank saying it. And so if we've got now, thankfully, got organizations like that, people are going to start to be like, wait, what am I investing in? And I do think that awareness then can push and drive the change. And I would hope that Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all these big institutions really start to offer the better for you products, just like General Mills did. They acquired Annie's, they offered better for you, and then they had that hybrid model. Offer both. It's not either or, offer both and. You're going to want people that are like, I don't care. And you're also going to have this emerging 21st century consumer that's like, I really do care, and I want to invest in a livable future for my kids. The other thing that's happening is we've got this big, like, generational wealth transfer that's happening, where money is going to go into the hands of women in 2030. And it's the first time we've seen something like that. And it's the equivalent to the size of the US GDP. It's the first time we've seen something like that. And so it creates a lot of opportunities too. And, something I learned in the food industry was, if you go at it with this either or attitude, like, no one's going to listen. And so really it's, how can we create both? And, we've seen that in energy with all of the alternative vehicles that have come on, with wind and solar and all these things. And that's what we did in the food space. And I would offer that's what needs to happen in finance.
One of the reasons I was so intrigued by you and reached out to you to begin with was because you do take such a collaborative approach. We've had some other amazing guests, Michael Gorton, literally the founder of telemedicine, and he said the exact same thing. And I'm noticing this trend where it's, you didn't come in and say like all these massive corporations are terrible for putting profits over people. You came in and said, no, it makes absolute sense you did this. We need the regulations to make you do the right thing, right? Like you didn't attack. And I find that so powerful. Is that tied to your ethos and your why for making this your mission in life?
Yeah, I mean, I think we belong to each other. So it's like, we're either going to all get this right or we're all going to get it wrong. And so, inside of these multinationals, absolutely all of them, including some of the most egregious chemical companies, I have met people that are really, really, really good people trying to do the right thing. And, we've all screwed up. We've all made mistakes, and we don't want to be judged by that one mistake. And so, I think what has also started to happen in the food industry is we saw a ton of turnover in leadership. And that was huge. I did a lot of campaigning and labeling and lobbying around getting genetically engineered ingredients labeled. And the food industry was really resistant and put up millions of dollars against that effort. And while they won at the ballot, like it never passed as a law, what happened was the consumer got educated and started asking for free-from products. And so a lot of those CEOs kind of through that era stepped down. And as younger CEOs take the helm of these companies, like they know what's going on with these kids. Like it's obvious now. And I think that there's a consciousness. This isn't fringe anymore. This isn't, left coast, west coast, none of that stuff anymore. And I do think, sort of approaching it with the attitude of this is what I know, this is my background, and I don't have the depth of the experience that you, Steve at General Mills does. And so how can we actually collaborate here to figure out a solution? And it's taken decades to create this mess of a food system. So it's not something we're going to fix overnight. And again, it has all of these layers when you think about investors and you think about the responsibility. So it's, you've got to educate boards, you've got to educate, the investment community, the consumers are waking up. And I think just having that understanding that we really are all connected by this, and that it's in the best interest of everyone to really align and get this right.
Absolutely. Can you tell us where our listeners can kind of keep up with what you're doing and maybe a little bit more about your book?
I know, I'm so excited about the
Me
book because it
too.
really speaks to a lot of this and sort of these emerging trends in this data that's going to be influencing business in the 21st century. And then, because I had to go through so much sort of personal excavation and reflection and analysis, at the end of every chapter, I ask my readers to sort of take an inventory, like, what are your fears and who are the naysayers in your life? And what about that voice between your ears? And why am I asking you this? Because like it really impacts you in business, kind of whatever's going on internally is going to impact you as much as all of this external stuff. And we've all seen leaders that didn't get that right, and they kind of leak all over everything, and they leak all over their teams, and it's messy in the media. You don't want to be that. So seeding innovation is the path to profit and purpose in the 21st century. And was just such a joy to write because I got to celebrate and share a lot of this information. My friends from the World Bank have contributed to it, and to really sort of bring this forward and say, here's the opportunity in front of us, and to be able to do good and feel good about it, which is like what we all want to do. So that is coming in April. And then RobynO'Brien.com always. And then I've just joined Montcalm. And so MontcalmTCR.com. And that's, again, it's all about this alignment with impact and investing. And then find me on social media, but please reach out. I love hearing from people. I love hearing stories. And I am so with you guys on this healthcare stuff. Like, I think we got to collaborate on something together because I'm in Florida because I have a son out there. So it's, however we can collaborate, because I really do believe it just drives me nuts in these political campaigns and debates where it's like they'll talk about the healthcare system but not be talking about the food, and I'm like, food is healthcare.
Yes,
you
and
know,
the
Cause and
climate.
effect.
so
Right?
Absolutely.
however I can support there too.
Well, thank you for that. It's been really inspiring to see, like, I watched your 2011 TED Talk, right? And I'm like, that was 2011. And to see what you've done since then, and just, I hope you're really proud of yourself and the impact that you've had on the world. I know that sounds maybe a little bit dramatic, but it's not. And I hope that in, a few years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever, we can look back and have had the same impact on healthcare. Like, that's my ultimate goal. So thank you for inspiring me.
Thank you.
Probably
Yeah,
our
I mean,
listeners.
that TED Talk, I said a prayer. I just said a prayer to let my heart speak. I was so scared.
Oh, you
my
can't
gosh,
tell. You did amazing.
I was so scared. And then when they posted it online and we watched it start to kind of spread, and then it was amazing. And I think it is sort of the collaborative nature. Like, I'd hear from people and they'd be like, oh, I just translated this into Greek. And I'm like, what? And it was wild. And to really see how it touched so many. And I'd have friends like send pictures from like farmers markets in Europe where there would be like clips from it. So it was fascinating. And I've maintained this, that courage is contagious.
Mhm.
And I have a really dear friend from high school in Texas. She's a best-selling fiction author. Her name is Catherine Senner. And she wrote in one of her first novels, you have to be brave with your life so that others can be brave with theirs. And I really, really do believe that. And so maybe that's what I would leave the listeners with as we wrap up, is just, where can you be just a little bit braver in your life? Is it braver in a conversation? Is it braver in, reaching out to somebody new? Is it braver in trying something new? Is it braver in having a hard conversation with one of those family members that can be hard?
Mhm.
But just, I do think the braver we can be, the faster we can really start to create these changes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robyn.
Love it. Thank you, Robyn.